It's another video where No Thank You walks around this small section of my room. I can't decide what this video is going to be about because I want to talk about the problem with stoicists and the problem with the problem with the way you hate people, because there's a right and a wrong way to hate people. I guess I'll do the stoicist thing, and if I still have momentum, I'll do the hate people thing. So let's do the stoicist thing. Stoicism, if you don't know, was a philosophy developed in ancient Greece, very popular in ancient Greece, possibly, although it's hard to say, but likely influenced by Eastern philosophy, Chinese philosophy and that sort of thing. And to boil it down, Stoicism is a flowchart. It's a flowchart of to help you deal with life. It was very, very popular before Christianity took over. It was like probably the predominant ideology in of course, not the entire world, but a big portion of the world. So the flowchart goes like this. You're worrying about something. You're all bothered about something. You ask yourself one question. Can I do something about this? Can I do something to stop this from happening or to change it so it doesn't bother me anymore? Let's say, I don't know, you're worrying about, am I going to ask this girl out? Something like that, right? It can apply to pretty much anything. Oh, I'm worried, I want to ask this girl out, but I don't know if she's going to reject me, blah, blah, blah. So, you follow this flowchart. You're worrying about something. Can I do something about this? Can I do something about whether or not this girl's going to go out with me? Yeah, I could ask her out. In that case, there's no point worrying about it, because you clearly can do it and get your answer. Or, in another case, I'm so worried about the fucking crisis. I don't know, I'm worried that, I'm worried that I'm going to lose my job. Can I do anything about that? No, not really. I can't really do anything to make my boss decide whether or not to fire me or not. In that case, there's no point in worrying about it, because you can't do anything about it. That's basically the flowchart of Stoicism. You're worrying about something. Can you do something to fix it? Then if you can, then there's no point worrying because you can fix it. Can you not do anything to fix it? Well, if you can't do anything to fix it, what's the point in worrying about it? That's not helping anyone. That's Stoicism. And, you know, it's great. And then it kind of went away, and it kind of came back recently-ish, like around you saw the birth like a little bit in the 60s, but more like 70s, 80s type of situation. Up until now, it's been steadily, there's like a small subset of people who have been like, yeah, Stoicism was cool, these guys knew what they were talking about. Except that we don't live in pre-Christian times anymore, sadly. Bunch of shit's changed with regard to people's general view of morality and stuff. And so, the modern Stoicists, they leave out in a very, very, very important detail in Stoicism. They leave it out, or they sort of leave it out by omission. They just don't really mention it, or they sort of sweep it under the rug. A very, very key part of the Greek Stoicism. And the reason they don't talk about it is because it's a terrible marketing tactic. And just like all ideologies, Stoicism relies on marketing to perpetuate itself. So, what is this thing that they leave out? Well, that thing is that the Greeks were just completely okay with suicide in regards to the Stoicist ideology. Because it follows, if you are in a situation that's terrible and you can't do anything about it, saying just don't worry about it is like, well, if it gets the reason they allow themselves to say, if it's that bad you can't do anything about it, just don't worry about it, is because there is the implicit idea that if it gets that bad, you can always just kill yourself. And I believe the words in fucking whoever it was, I think it was Epicurus, I don't remember who invented Stoicism, he was like, something along the lines of that you can always reach for the knife and cut your wrist. Because that makes sense, right? That if you follow the Stoicist rules, the flowchart, that's the only way you can get it to make sense. If you don't accept suicide, if you don't say suicide is an option, which of course no one in the modern era would make an ideology where suicide is an important part because it wouldn't sell. I've got to charge my phone, sorry about that. Well, if you ignore that, then it doesn't help anyone because you haven't actually stopped anyone from suffering. All you've done is say, just be okay with it. Well, why should I be okay with it? It fucking sucks. And you know, in Greek time they should say, why should I be okay with it? Well, because if it's really that bad, you can just kill yourself. But no one's going to say that anymore. So modern stoicists, they're pussy bitches. Also, there's other problems with stoicism, just as a whole. For example, you know, it was very popular with slaves, for example. That's interesting. But anyway, one of the problems with stoicism is how it comes from a place of. It only really makes sense if you have quite a, how would you say it, privileged type of existence. Like saying, well, if you can't do anything about it, then what's the point of worrying about it? Is like makes sense if your problems are the problems of someone who's not in a particularly bad position. But if your problems are, I don't know, you're starving because you live in a country where your access to food has been cut off due to political conflict, there's nothing you could do about it, but you should still be worrying about it because that is a pretty important thing. And so, of course, the Greeks would just say, well, kill yourself in that case. But they can't do it anymore. But the second important thing that's the problem with Stoicism, and this goes also for the Greeks, is that Stoicism assumes that you have all the information, or that you can logically process all the information 100% correctly 100% of the time, which is just not true. So, for example, you may be in a situation where you think you can't do anything to fix it, but in fact you can do something to fix it, you just haven't realized that you can. Or the other way around, you may be in a situation where you think you can do something to fix it, but actually doing that thing to fix it would, in a way that you couldn't possibly predict, cause everything to go even worse. And that's like, that in a way is how you end up with the situation in Japan. Japan has a culture, this idea of shikata ganai, which means sort of like there's nothing I can do about it, or it is what it is. And shikata ganai, having a culture based around this acceptance, mono no aware type of situation, it is what it is, seems cool until you actually live in that culture, because it's used to basically just say, well, it's not my responsibility because I tried, but I guess I couldn't really do anything about it, so what's the point in worrying about it? It's the same thing, as I said, based on Eastern philosophy, Stoicism. The reason it sucks for the people in Japan is because people would, especially, they forgot to get rid of hierarchy first. That's the important part. So if your boss just says, well, shikata ganai, there's nothing I can do, that's just the way the world works, you can't challenge them because they have more power than you. So even if they're wrong, even if there is something they can do, let's say, I don't know, something relatively harmless, like the existence of pachinko parlors. Under Japanese law, gambling is illegal, right? But pachinko gets around this because what they do is, when you go to pachinko, you only win these little metal balls, and then you go to what is legally another establishment, and then you trade in your metal balls for money, because technically then you're not trading anything for money in the same place as the pachinko parlor, so it's technically not gambling according to the law. Everyone knows it's gambling. No one in the fucking offices of Japan's government is like, what the fuck's pachinko? How does that work? Everyone knows how pachinko works. Everyone knows it's gambling. But they made the law so it's just specific enough that they can turn around and say, shikata ganai, there's nothing I can do to fix it, because it would be a hassle to change it. And I'm completely pro gambling. I don't give a fuck if you gamble or not. But you end up with lots of situations like that where something could be done technically, but they do just enough effort to the point where they can say to themselves and others that, well, there's nothing I can do. That's how that's basically what happens when you follow Stoicism to the end. You end up with that sort of thing. And also, Japan, as we all know, has an interesting relationship with suicide. So that's the problems with Stoicism. That's why I'm not a Stoicist. I'm sure some Stoicist in the comment will be like, well, actually, you didn't know that Epicurus... It's probably not Epicurus. I'm probably embarrassing myself right now. But, he was like, actually, if you don't have all the information, then here's the solution. Whatever. It still doesn't make sense. Like, you could be in a situation where you just don't know that you can improve your... You could say, well, there's no point in worrying about it. Oh, something bad's happening to me, but there's nothing I can do, so there's no point in worrying about it. But actually, you just don't know that there's something you can do because you haven't tried. And if you just tried it, then you would actually be able to fix it, and therefore you would be suffering less. There's a pretty clear logical fallacy there. Anyway, that's my video about Stoicism. Now let's talk about hating people. Specifically the mentally ill. You are in a world We're in a world based around a lot of awareness of roots of oppression, roots of a lot of various systems of power. You know, this is a type of Foucault type of situation, except no one actually knows where it came from in modern whatever. You could post-structuralist type of situation where, you know, there was Marx and he was like, oh wow, there's a system of power here where there's a fucking undemocratic hierarchy of the workplace. That's bad. We should democratize that. And then Stirner was like, actually, what about the rest of the world? And then a bunch of years later, a bunch of other guys, French blokes, were like, yo, that's kind of true. This is all kind of fucked. And that's how the world works. So now, you know, you got a lot of stuff like, well, there's class oppression, of course, like the way the working class is exploited by the bourgeoisie. We all know that's real. We all know that happens. But then there's a more like foggy grey area. It's not grey area, but a little less easy to say from an economic standpoint. Less easy to put into numbers, we could say. Stuff like racism, sexism, transphobia, all that sort of shit. Where it's like, yes, it's fair to say racism is a real thing, but it's much harder to quantify the exact way racism works than it is to quantify the exact way that class oppression works. And that's, you know, that doesn't mean racism is any less important. It's equal. They're all equally real and impactful. It's just a little harder to, you know, put it into numbers in a way that is very, very easy to understand. But either way, I'm digressing a little bit. The point I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of people right now who are very aware of this, especially when it comes to race and gender and sexuality. And you know, even ableism. There is actually you know, the disability rights movement. Great. There's a lot of great people working for disability rights, although strangely enough, for some reason, they don't get the same attention that racial equality and gender equality and that sort of thing gets, because ableism is, in my opinion, from my experience, just very, very prevalent. Like, and especially towards the mentally ill and the neurodivergent. It's very easy, and the reason for that is because you can very easily imagine a world where black people are treated equally to white people. That because we know that they are both valid, perfectly cool human beings who would easily fit into the world, and it's completely arbitrary that we've decided these people are this race, these people are this race, and whatever, right? But it's much harder for an average person to imagine a world where schizophrenics are treated the same way as neurotypicals. It's much harder because it threatens the idea that the world is built to its maximum efficiency, that civilization is sustainable. Because as soon as you start thinking, why do we treat schizophrenics the way we treat schizophrenics? Why do we have to lock them up away from the rest of society? You start to think, hold on, so you're telling me, no matter how well I try and build my society, there's always going to be this group of people, about 1% of the population, who are necessarily so opposed, just pure genetics, nothing they can do about it, so antithetical to the existence of society that they have to be literally locked up and medicated and tranquilized away from the rest of us so that they don't cause collapse. Something's a bit fucked there. But no, most people wouldn't really be, you know, that's a very big leap to take from, I don't know, women and gay people and brown people are just as cool as the rest of us. I'm trying to fucking, this is really, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. It's much harder because mental, people have a weird thing about mental health. It's very prevalent in the left, especially towards autistic people and schizophrenic people and that sort of thing, because of you would have to really internalize a lot of things that people sort of don't necessarily like to internalize, like ideas that your way of thinking is not the correct way of thinking, that and to really understand and accept subjectivity as an important part of the world we live in, because well, it's complicated. It's not. I'm not even sure about it right myself, but there's, you know, if you want to talk about leftism, the way it's built in materialism, that's kind of, based on dialectical materialism, it makes sense why certain, like, more orthodox Marxist type of situations, you're more, you're Marxist-Leninists or whatever, you're, I don't know, you're communalists. That's not an orthodox Marxist. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. These people, the very Hegelian people, you can see why they would be unwilling to accept that sort of thing. But that's not the majority of the modern left. Although they do trace their roots back to it, it's not the majority of the modern left. The majority of the modern left is not that sort of person. They're more into, postmodern, post-structuralist type of situation. So it's strange why. Well, firstly, I guess they just don't know. They just, like, they are living in an environment very influenced by people like Derrida and Foucault and Deleuze, but they haven't actually read Derrida, Foucault and Deleuze. Otherwise they would, and Lacan probably. Otherwise they would know that mental health was like a big deal that they were all talking about, because no one talks about mental health anymore. Some people do, but there is no. People are going out in the streets and saying Black Lives Matter, and people are going out in the streets and saying Black Trans Lives Matter, and that's great. And as performative as it is, I'm happy that people are saying that. Imagine if you're a Black trans person, you see 100 people in the streets waving flags like that. Sure, it's great. However, it's interesting that there is no Black Autistic Lives Matter, Black Schizophrenic Lives Matter. I'm just saying it's interesting. It's a little interesting fact that as per usual, mental health issues are pushed right to the bottom of the barrel, because the mentally ill are the undesirables of society. They cannot be allowed to live with the rest of civilized world. And you'll notice that people are very, very willing to police. I hate to say this word, this phrase, because it's it's very it has connotations, but to police language surrounding mental health, for example, saying the word retard is bad, that sort of thing, but unwilling to take genuine action. And also, it tends to be that the people who will do things like be very angry at you if you say the word retard will also use their own dog whistles to mean mentally ill person. And what do I mean by that? For example, you may see people on the left refer to people on the right as neckbeards, basement dwellers. You may see them say, like, these fucking anime avatars, these fucking furries. They may say, oh, look at this picture, you can see how much they all stink, they must smell awful, that type of situation. Think about what that actually means. That is a dog whistle for autistic person. Who tends to be an anime fan, a furry, autistic person? Who tends to be more likely to not be so good at personal hygiene? Someone who isn't neurotypical, someone who, autistic, schizophrenic, even just depressed or something else. It's more likely that would be someone who is not neurotypical. And you can even see this in the way that they use social capital. And I say the left. This is also highly prevalent, a lot across the internet, across the world. Everyone hates the mentally ill. It's a non-partisan issue that we need to lock up schizophrenics. That's the world that we live in. Is that locking up schizophrenics and medicating them in prison? That's a non-partisan issue, which is just great for all the schizophrenics. Remember the biggest autism charity in the world, Autism Speaks, right? Or in America at least. I don't know if it's the biggest in the world. I think it's the biggest in the world. They spend most of a big chunk of their money trying to find a cure for autism. They don't support autistic people they do some stuff, but they ultimately believe autism is a disease which needs to be cured. Like, these people aren't here to help, they're here to cure. It's like gay conversion therapy. It's awful, really. It makes me very upset that the world treats the mentally ill so so badly. And the problem is that you will also see, a lot of people in the modern age talking about replacing cops with mental health workers, and saying, there's a tweet that was doing the rounds that said, like, all men need to go to therapy, that sort of thing. Because you can't be critical of the mental health system and still, without challenging certain other parts of your beliefs around how civilization works. It's great, but it's great that exists, but it's bad that no one's willing to do it. So that was my thing. Oh yeah, also fat people, tend to be mentally ill. A lot of people with Down syndrome tend to put on weight very easily. People with autism tend to be less good at regulating their diet, or people with OCD might be less good at regulating their diet, that sort of thing. I used to be one of those people who was like, these fucking feminists with their fat acceptance. But after thinking about it for a while, my original thing, I thought was, oh, well, being fat is just unhealthy. And it's not healthy. It's not good to encourage people to be unhealthy. But I would also turn around and say drugs are fine. And drugs are also unhealthy. So it doesn't make sense that I would be, on the one hand, on the side of it's your own body, you can do whatever you want, and on the other side be like, oh, you can't do that, it's bad for you. So then I was like, well, if I don't think that, it must be because I think fat people don't have self-control, and that's what's bad. But also I realized I don't really care about that. Again, it's not really my business what someone else does with their body. Being fat is usually a symptom of a larger problem, whether that problem is the way food is in the modern world, that high carb, high fat diets spread by capitalist corporations, and they literally can't afford better food, or are unwilling to spend the time to make better food because they have grueling jobs. Working class people tend to get home and not want to cook a fucking 5-course meal because you spend your whole day at a tough job. You don't want to get home and spend a while cooking necessarily. You might, but not everyone does, in which case ordering fast food makes more sense. Or you may be, someone like, let's say, Ula Lilia, who has OCD and just doesn't like eating anything that isn't pizza. It is what it is. It doesn't matter. So I've had to challenge my own beliefs, and over time I've been like, yeah, you know what? I think I was just a bit of a dickhead, and there wasn't really any logical reason for me to hate fat people. It's their own body, they probably have their own problems to deal with, not really my business. Same thing with follower counts online. Who is most likely to have a large follower account? It's someone who is a normie, a neurotypical, someone who is autistic. I don't know why that was the wrong syllable to put stress on. Autistic, someone who doesn't understand social conventions very well, is much less likely to build a follower base on a website that's entirely based around understanding social conventions very well. Someone who, it's that sort of thing. So, if you insult someone, oh, look at this dude with only 20 followers talking about me, blah. Well, why? It's possible that person has 20 followers because they don't understand human interaction because of a neurological difference between you and them. Not necessarily the smartest move to insult that, is it? Doesn't make you come across looking good if you do that. That sort of thing, it just makes me a little upset. And I see, I talked about the left, but I see it. The only reason I point it out with the left, and I tend towards pointing it out with the left, is because it's hypocritical. It makes sense if right-wing people hate the mentally ill because they, that's at least matches with the rest of their incoherent ideology. Yeah, there you go. It's same with, mental illness matches with drug addiction. If you hate the druggies, hate the drug addicts, that sort of thing. They say addiction is a mental health issue, but also I'm skeptical as to what addiction even means. Let me drink some coffee. That shit's been out for too long, it's cold. Oh, it's okay if you do weed or something like that. But doing addictive drugs should be regulated, that sort of thing. Like addictive drugs, crack, heroin, that sort of thing, they should be regulated heavily by the government. And they should have programs which make you get off of them. Well, the answer is like, what actually is addiction? This is a tough thing to talk about. So make sure you know where I'm coming from. I talk as someone who has addictions and who has had friends who have had serious opiate addictions, that sort of thing. I'm not talking from a place of ignorance here. The truth is, addiction isn't someone with a gun pointing to you, telling you. I mean, in some cases you can say it is, but let's say an opiate addiction. It's the idea behind saying addictive drugs should be made, like addictive drugs are significantly worse than non-addictive. Like physically addictive drugs are a different thing to less physically addictive drugs. Like I don't know, the difference between weed and heroin, right? Something like that. Well, it's because the idea is that being addicted to something takes away your agency, so you're no longer responsible enough to determine whether or not you want to be doing something. That's just not true. That is just a convenient lie people tell themselves to dehumanize drug users. If you're a drug user and you buy some heroin, that heroin's not going to do anything to you unless you make the choice to take it out of the bag and inject it into yourself or sniff it or whatever. That it's just in a bag sitting there or whatever. It can't hurt anyone. You have to make the choice. And the same way, it may be a weighted choice, it may be a harder choice to make, but if you're a heroin addict, hundreds, thousands, million people do make the choice to just stop. It's still a choice. It doesn't take away your agency. It makes it adds a factor. It adds a factor, but it doesn't take away your ability to reason as a human being. I think it's just a convenient lie people tell themselves so they don't have to think of drug users as human beings with agency and the ability to decide for themselves. And it's also convenient for drug users as well, because if you're a drug user, you can say, I'm just addicted, man, instead of having to, actually accept that maybe you just like it, and maybe that's okay. Maybe you just like doing heroin. Great. For as far as I'm concerned, I don't give a fuck. Go ahead, do heroin. It doesn't affect me. I'm happy for you. If you're having a good time, if you're, do whatever you want. The problems tend to come from the economic side of things, actually. Like, being addicted to heroin isn't so bad. It's being addicted to heroin and not having the money to buy the heroin that causes problems. Fix the economic system first. Then we can talk about drug policy. And we can talk about it by me burning the building down that we're supposed to meet in with you inside it. That's how we're going to talk about drug policy. So there we go. Man, what the fuck was this video? Epicurious, stoicism, druggies, and autistic schizophrenics. That's what you come to know Thank You Channel for, right? Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? People you hate, you probably just hate them because you're retarded, is basically my point. Like, why do you hate... this is somewhat of a reaction to Patricia Taxton's video about the movie Idiocracy. Which, I like that video. I'm sure she's completely right about the movie Idiocracy. But I think her point, the misanthropy is bad because something is just wrong. That there's nothing wrong with being misanthropic. Generally hating humanity, generally not liking people. That's fine. That's not a problem. Especially if you don't have the power to act on it. Especially if you're like a regular person, not a capitalist. That's fine. What does it matter if you hate most people? And I think we can prove... I think the reason that people don't like it is because it kind of goes against populism of Marxist ideology. The idea of the masses, the spook of the masses. You can't really believe in the masses if you that the masses will spontaneously do a revolution when the economic material conditions are right. If you kind of hate the masses, so you kind of have to believe, you have to have a religious faith in this concept of the masses in order to be a populist of any kind. But that's its own video. That's its own video. Yeah, you know what? That will be its own video. That'll be my next video. I will talk about why the masses is bad, and why, and an introduction to post-left anarchism. There we go. That will be my next video.